guys, how we doing today? I am your Emperor, the Crown Fiend, and it's been a little bit since my last upload, but of course that's because I've been working hard on this 10K special, which before we get into anything, I want to thank you guys so much for getting me there. It's been amazing, and I honestly didn't think I'd hit it this soon. I thought it'd be end of the year or beginning of next year before I hit it, but you guys are amazing. Thank you guys so much, and it's surreal. Like, I don't know what else to say. For once in my life, I'm kind of speechless. But hitting 10K, this is what I felt would be an appropriate thank you guys, because I'm a proud believer that actions speak louder than words, and this will be my best video to date, in my opinion. Of course, it'll have the most editing, the most thought out story to it, and I'm just gonna let you guys know right now, if you don't know who Hush is, there's a few comics I would highly recommend you read, and they would be the renowned title Batman Hush, which, if you watch that movie, do yourself a favor and read the comics. The movie did not adapt anything correctly, in my opinion. It is not anything that should be associated with the character Hush. And another one that I really like would be called Batman Heart of Hush. Those two comics are what inspired this, and is what I've actually based it off of. So, with that in mind, I hope you guys will enjoy this 10,000 subscriber special of What If Deku Was Hush, Chapter 1, Origin. We pick up this story when Deku and Bakugo are in school, right after Bakugo got his quirk. You see, Bakugo, he's still bullying Deku because he was defending the kid, and now Deku's on the ground. However, instead of just staying down like he did in canon, Deku gets back up. This really pisses off Bakugo, so he beats Deku more and more until Deku's bleeding pretty badly. All the students are trying to hold Bakugo as he's still trying to get at Deku. However, the teachers step in and get Bakugo under control, and after seeing Deku's condition, he's rushed to the hospital where his mother works. You see, in this timeline, Inko is a brilliant surgeon who has saved hundreds of lives. However, nothing could have prepared her for seeing her son's condition. She was heartbroken and immediately takes Deku on as her patient. Some weeks that had passed, but Deku, he would make a full recovery and be released. However, Inko wouldn't allow Deku to go back to that school, since it was on them. They allowed Bakugo to hurt her son so badly. This also put an end to our friendship with Mitsuki. Bakugo would get suspended. However, it would only be for a few days. Now at his new school, Deku would be introduced to his class, and this is where he would meet Momo. Since Inko is a very famous surgeon, she's very wealthy in this timeline. Plus, it was actually Momo's mother that told Inko about this school. Time passes, and Momo and Deku become good friends, and even start flirting back and forth with each other. Deku's intelligence would be blooming, as he would read his father's books in his study. Inko is divorced after Hisashi came home drunk one night and beat Deku and her. Ever since then, Inko was very protective of Deku, and has poured many resources into making sure Deku is very capable of protecting himself. With that being the case, Deku has been reading up on the art of war, learning martial arts, his specialty being Muay Thai, and even learning how to fight with weapons. The Bakugo situation made it clear that Deku will always be at a disadvantage since he's quirkless, and Inko wants to shorten the gap. However, Deku wanted more, but didn't know if he wanted to go down the path of getting it. That day he went to school, he saw a new student entering the faculty office. Deku would ask Momo if she knew the new kid. Momo would say, "No, I don't. I don't know who he is." Deku would look at him and say, we should try to befriend him." Momo would smile and say, "That's so nice of you, Izuku." At this point, Deku would be 12, so it's been a long time since the Bakugo incident. Deku and Momo would be in class, and see this boy up there. He's wearing glasses, had dark blue hair, and was dressed up well. In Deku's mind, he was thinking, this guy's gotta have a rich family. He was smiling at the thought of that. The boy would introduce himself as Tenya Ida. Ida would be seated right beside Deku and Momo. That made Deku start to have his mind working as he would go up to befriend Ida, and Momo would help him reach that goal. It took a while and a lot of acting, but Deku would eventually become friends with Ida. The three of them would be laughing together and playing together, studying together, and eventually spending the night at each other's houses. Until one day, Ida's family was murdered, including his older brother. His father and mother were gunned down, and his brother was killed rescuing people in a fire. Ida suddenly inherited his family's money, and that made Deku very jealous. That's when a thought crossed his mind. Deku was like, what if his family died? Then he'd be just like Ida, rich and not have anyone in his life to get in his way. It'd be perfect. So Deku thinks, and he sets things up to try and kill his parents. After all, his father would have to die as well to ensure that Deku would get every single penny of his family's money. That afternoon, when he got home, he'd set his plan into motion. First off, he'd send an anonymous message to his father saying that Inko was having sexual relationships with multiple guys and bad-mouthing to them, saying that they were much better than him. Then he'd set up several chemicals he'd been buying separately under a false name and address. Mixing the chemicals together, he'd create a sleeping gas that would be odorless. Now, all he had to do was wait for the moment his father took the bait and used the chemicals to put him and his mother to sleep, then burn down the house and make a convincing, narrow escape from the burning building. And all would be his. That night, his father arrived, breaking into the door as he would begin to beat Inko, and that's when Deku released the gas, putting them both to sleep. After that, Deku begins his next step. He takes the fire that was burning in the fireplace and spreads the fire throughout the house. As the fire began to rage throughout the house, Deku would run out, making his daring escape. However, Ida's aunt and uncle were walking by the house and would see the fire. They'd rush over to Deku, and Ida's uncle would rush into action and would just barely be able to save Inko's life. Deku would be at the hospital with Inko, and he'd be furious. Ida's uncle messed up his plan. However, Inko's life wouldn't be much longer, as she'd only be able to live a few hours at most before she succumbed to her injuries from both Hisashi beating her and smoke inhalation. Deku was glad to hear this. However, he had to cry fake tears for appearance sake. A few hours later, Inko dies and Deku achieves what he's always wanted. Chapter 2: Finding One's Path. After the death of Inko, Deku was raised by the Yaoruzu family. Momo was on the path to becoming a hero along with Ida, while Deku was on the path to becoming a great surgeon. He was in America and was taking dual classes and graduated with both a high school diploma and a college degree. He was able to get his master's degree on top of that. With that, he began working with his high-rolling clients. His clients ranged from political leaders to mob bosses, heroes and villains alike. He became a famous surgeon worldwide at just the age of 18. He'd get calls from Ida and Momo all the time trying to catch up with him, and they would. Deku would be on a private plane, heading back to Japan, where he'd be setting up his own private practice. Momo and Ida were in the middle of training for the UA entrance exams. Keep in mind, UA is a college in this one. Both were giving recommendations, so they'd be going through that course. Deku would be drinking some scotch, thinking about how good it would be to see them again, but he was also kind of furious to see Ida again, after what his uncle tried to do all those years ago. However, he buried those thoughts as he remembered that Momo would be waiting there for him, and he still had every explicit picture she'd ever sent him. So he drank his scotch, kicked back, and enjoyed his flight. Ida was excited to see his friend again. After all, the two of them were like brothers, and Ida wanted to show off his girlfriend to Deku. Momo said that she'll set up the double date for tonight. After he's rested from his flight, she would look at her phone and tell Ida that she needs to go to the airport to pick up Izuku. So she'll see him tonight and give Yui her best. Ida would smile and say, "Sure thing. Tell Izuku I'll see him tonight." While Momo arrives at the airport, Deku is waiting for her with a bouquet of roses. Momo's face turns red as she embraces Deku, hugging him tight. Deku looks at her and says, "I missed you." Momo says, "Welcome back." The two head back to Momo's place. While on the way, Momo asks Deku if he'd feel up for going on a double date with Ida and his girlfriend. Deku says, "Of course I am. It's a chance to see my brother Ida again, and to meet his girlfriend, who I've heard so much about." Momo would smile and say that she'll set it up. "How's 8 o'clock tonight sound?" "Just perfect," Deku replies. So Momo sets everything up. While Deku relaxes in the hot tub, Momo joins him as she lays her head on his shoulder. The two relax for a few hours, and then they get dressed. Momo is in a red silky dress, while Deku is in a gray Italian suit with a red button-up shirt on. They get into the limo and set off to pick up Ida and Yui. They get back there and immediately Ida goes to hug Deku, and of course he hugs Ida back and smiles at him. Ida is wearing a white and blue suit, while Yui is wearing a white dress. The four of them head towards the restaurant. They get there and are seated. Now Deku is finally properly introduced to Yui, as the history is told to her about who Deku is and everything that's happened between the three of them. After that, they all catch up, as they're told they have the exams coming up in 2 days. Deku would give his support to them, and he would say he's happy for him. His private practice opens up on the same day. They're all happy for Deku. Now, after a few hours, the four all go their separate ways. Deku and Momo head back to her house for a romantic night that's been long overdue. From here we skip to the day where Deku is opening up his private practice. Everything's going well. He gets a text from Momo saying that she passed, and he smiles. He sits in his chair at his desk. He thinks it's time to let all this go and be genuinely happy. He has Momo, and his mother died. So, by all accounts, he has everything he could ever want. This causes him to choose to let things go and live life to the fullest. From here, we skip all the way up to the USJ incident. You see, in this one, since Momo is very confident in herself, she actually would try to save Kaminari. However, with that, it ends up with Kaminari seriously hurt, and Momo is killed by the villains. Deku doesn't find out until he has 2 patients brought in, and one of them being Momo. And Hida charges in with tears in his eyes, going up to Deku and saying that he's sorry. Deku just says that he'll save them both. He starts to work on Kaminari and manages to save his life. With Momo, he's constantly fighting between doing surgery as fast as possible and stabilizing her, and unfortunately, she dies right there in front of him, and that breaks Deku. He yells for everyone to leave the room. Once he's alone, the tears start to flow from his eyes as Ida and everyone else hears him crying. He tells Momo that he'll avenge her. He promises. After that, he walks out and says that he failed. Momo Yaoyorozu is dead. Nezu is very displeased and saddened to hear. And Ida, he's breaking down. Deku just walks towards the shower and washes all the blood off of his body and gets dressed and heads back to his office, where he orders certain materials as he begins to plan his vengeance on both the villains and the heroes. Chapter 3: Hush is born. The night began, and Deku was drinking as he mourned the loss of his beloved. However, the more he drank, the more his thoughts began to drift elsewhere, to his childhood, more often than not, especially the years he spent with his mother and his father. He remembered how his father would come into his room and beat him so badly he'd crawl to his mother, begging her for help. However, she'd just look at him, bloodied and beaten, and wouldn't raise a single finger to help him. His father would then have his way with his mother right there in the very same room. Who couldn't move after all the beatings that he took, and he just couldn't move. So he just closed his eyes and tried to drown out the sound. The next day, his mother would force him to read books about war and strategy. From there, it went to philosophy, martial arts books, reading up on all types of weapons. There was never a moment where he had any freedom in his life. However, there was one word that he would keep hearing his mother say to him. Through the bandages he'd wear from the beatings throughout all the years, the only word he'd ever heard clearly from her was hush. Deku's thoughts were interrupted by his nurse telling him he has a patient. Deku would turn to look at her and say that we're closed and drunk. I'm not in any shape to perform an operation. The nurse would say that it's an emergency and it's a villain from the incident. Deku would immediately get up and say, very well, tell them that Dr. Midoriya is in. Prep the patient for a special surgery. All the staff prepares for what's about to happen as they start locking the doors, covering all the windows, and turning off the lights. They then drug the ambulance staff, knocking them out, while others restrain the villain and begin electrocuting him over and over again. Deku then enters, asking the nurses if he's ready to answer some questions. The villain looks on as Deku points his scalpel towards his face. Deku then says that if he doesn't answer his questions honestly, he'll learn how it feels to have surgery without any anesthetics, and he'll promise to leave him horribly disfigured. While this is going on, Ida is with Momo's family, helping them grieve their daughter. Ida asks if Izuku has shown up, and he carries in some tea for the parents. Momo's mother would say that no, he hasn't even called yet. Ida says that he was in his office when he left the hospital to come here. He was the person Momo loved with all her heart, and she cared for him ever since elementary school. The years they spent together were the happiest she had. Momo was sad when he went to study overseas in America. The father then says that Deku must be grieving in his own way, but is also saving more lives since he is a surgeon. And who knows when he may get a call to save a life. At that time, Deku walks in the door of the house and apologizes for being late and hugs both the mother and the father. Then he notices Ida, and rage flashes in his eyes. But for a split second, he gets it under control before Ida can notice. Deku now knows every single detail of the USJ attack, on how Ida ran away, leaving everyone else there, how All Might didn't even try to help any of the others. He just went straight towards the fight. Everything else included. Deku knows about it all. How Ida didn't even get a scratch on him. The hatred he has for Ida is immeasurable. In his mind, Ida is always in his way, messing up his life. His mother would always go on about how amazing Ida is. It always felt like she would rather have had Ida for a son. And the worst part is, she'd always say that in front of the son she did have. His uncle almost ruined his plan of killing his mother. However, for Deku, he would just bury that deep down and would play his role in this play that he has just started. Of course, the actors and actresses wouldn't have any slightest idea that they're being used in this play, because, after all, he must keep things very true to his new code name. Hush. Chapter 4. Striking at a Distance. The UA Sports Festival will be announced, and given a date of being 3 months pushed back. This gives Deku time as he begins his plans. All of the gear comes in. His twin .45 pistols, his Kevlar body armor that he'd have tailor-made, his brown trench coat, and his special knives. For his mask, he'll use bandages. After all, it's the last thing he saw both his mother and Momo in. He used the color red in his body armor as a way to pay tribute to Momo. So he geared up and began his recon of all the students and staff of UA College, even hacked into the database at the Public Safety Commission's Hero Agency. From there, he'd download all the files secretly and securely, getting classified information on all his targets and his potential pawns. In scanning all the files, one name pops up and it catches Deku's attention. The name is Lady Nagant, a former hero agent who's said to be the best sniper out of anyone in the world. She could be helpful at a later date. He also reads reports on a bunch of college students being murdered, all died from multiple stab wounds. This was interesting to Deku, as the prime suspect is a young girl named Himiko Toga. Deku looks into her quirk and sees that she can transform into anyone by ingesting their blood. Deku writes her name down as an immediate recruit. He then looks up reports of the hero killer's stain and says that he'll be useful to him as well. Then he looks at professional reports that he exploits particular staff of UA College. He looks through Snipe's data and sees that he has a soft spot for kids at the orphanage. So, he writes his name down as usable. From there, he looks at information on the League of Villains, a group that he'll take out, as he'll be the only one to kill the heroes, mainly Ida. But he'll make him suffer first, and then he'll take everything away from Ida. Only then will he leave Japan forever. So he grabs his gun and heads out. However, he recites a quote: "One swallow does not make a summer, neither does one fine day." Similarly, one day or brief time of happiness does not make a person entirely happy. Aristotle is just one of the many things my mother made me read. Deku would go and track down Toga, and he'd begin to observe her. There's no need to recruit her just yet. After all, he needs to know her weaknesses, in case he needs to dispose of her. After all, these people will just be a bunch of unpredictable pawns at best, and at worst, targets to kill. Eventually, Deku would make contact with Toga, and after knocking her out, he'd take her back to his clinic and drug her. He'd have his staff prepare her for surgery. Deku would come into the operation room and begin the surgery. He'd implant a pacemaker on Toga's heart and rigged a trigger to it that would cause her to have violent heart attacks. This was his way of controlling her if she'd ever went out of control. He'd kill her without even wasting a bullet. After all, a gutter slut like her isn't worth such decency. Deku then cleans himself up, and from there he then goes to wait for Toga to awaken from her sleep. Whilst he does that, he plans a prison break using chemicals, the same ones he used on his parents all those years ago. While preparing the chemicals, Deku begins to remember being a child with Ida. This was when Momo was away on vacation with family. He remembers playing chess with Ida and telling him that he'd already lost. Ida asked Deku what? Deku said, "It won't be the next turn. It'll be 6 turns from now. You always do this, Ida, charging in without knowing their weaknesses. That's why I'll always win." That's when Deku finishes mixing the chemicals together. He rewraps his face with fresh bandages as he prepares to head out and break Lady Nagant out of prison, while Toga is still unconscious. Deku arrives in the Tartarus prison, and from there he filters the gas through the air ducts, knocking everyone out. Once the gas is gone, Deku moves through the prison and picks up Lady Nagant's body and leaves, but not before wiping the camera footage. He's gone before anyone even smart enough to know what had happened. Once done, he gets an email containing a download holding all the information on the League of Villains he could ever want. After all, he paid 12 million American for it. He then waits for Lady Nagant to wake up and is willing to play to her side of vengeance. Once she's awake, Deku asks her how she is, and immediately she tries to attack Deku. However, he ducks and stabs her in the side, pulling out his gun and putting it in her mouth with his finger on the trigger. Lady Nagant is amazed at how well he anticipated her moves and prepared for her. If he didn't want her alive, she'd be dead right now. Deku explains he has a need for her services. For a mission, he'd holster his gun, knowing she wouldn't dare try to attack him now that he's proven that she's not fast enough to kill him before he'd kill her. Lady Nagant would ask what the mission was. Deku would tell her to destroy the heroes and their system. Deku wouldn't be telling her the truth, just what he'd need to know for her to go along with his orders. She'd ask how he planned on doing that. All Deku says is striking at a distance. Chapter 5. Matters of the Heart. At this point in time, the sports festival would be held, as Deku would attend. However, it would actually be Toga, disguised as Deku, and under constant watch from Snipes and Lady Nagant. From here, the sports festival would begin. However, there would be a student missing, as that's what Deku would be attending to. Yui would be drugged and taken away secretly, or so Deku thought. He'd hear footsteps and couldn't see who was there. All of a sudden, Deku would feel something punch him, far too feminine of a voice to be a male. So Deku would wait. As soon as he felt the air change, he stabbed Toru in the stomach and pulled up, gutting her. After that, he picked up Yui and escaped. He'd tell Snipes to go clean things up, and if there was anyone else snooping around, to kill them. Snipes was pissed off, but he did what he was asked, or else the orphans would be killed. On his way there, Snipes would see a third-year student with blonde hair and blood all over him. Snipes would ask him what happened. The bully would say, I found an area covered in blood, and it's a first-year student. She's been murdered. Snipes would ask Lady Nagant to kill him. She would say fine, since he's in the way. She fired a shot that blew Mirio's head into a light red mist. Since he never saw it coming, he'd never be able to react to it. Snipes would turn around and see Endeavor right there behind him. And as fate would have it, he heard everything. A fight would break out from Snipes and Endeavor. The entire audience and students would be in shock. Lady Nagant would be about to kill Endeavor, however Deku would tell her that it's alright. They achieved their goal. Have Toga return with you. The two ladies returned to the hospital, where Deku was beginning to prepare for surgery. Toga would ask what's going on, and Deku would say he has a very special patient, and she requires open heart surgery. With a smile, he goes to the operation room and begins to remove Huey's heart. Lady Nagant tells Toga that she's never been more afraid of anyone else in her entire life. Hush scares her down to her core. Toga agrees with her, saying if this is what villains are like, she wishes a pro-hero would come save her. Lady Nagant holds Toga close and says that she doesn't think any hero could save them now. While Deku carefully removes Yui's heart, he begins to remember more of his childhood. The years spent during the divorce that led him to his father, penniless. During that time, his mother wouldn't allow him to leave her. His friends weren't allowed to see him. She'd hold him prisoner in his own room, pouring down more books and then advanced materials in school: poetry, math, biology, anatomy, science, chemistry, cryogenic science, and even much, much more. He was robbed of his childhood. What's more, she would never let him leave more than a few hours a day, and they never had company. Even when she was working, he'd hardly ever be free. The men she'd bring over, the noise they'd make, the look of disgust he'd receive from all of them. Then the emotional abuse he'd received from his mother when he stated that he just didn't like them. That led to Bakugo going and calling his mother a whore, and Deku, he He was pissed. He wasn't about to let someone speak of his mother that way, so he picked up a hammer and was about to hit Bakugo right in the face. However, Deku was stopped by the teachers who'd grab hold of him, and after that, he was forced to do mandatory anger management classes. His mother had set it all up so that he'd be dependent on her even more. He's glad she's dead. And then he removed Yui's heart and placed it in a cryo chamber, keeping it safe and alive, removing all types of bacteria from it, keeping it perfectly sterilized. And with that, Yui's body is sent to the hospital with a note. Ida is contacted by Deku, saying that Yui's in the hospital, and he's been asked to provide his skills. Ida rushes over and goes up to the room, but is stopped by Deku, saying that he needs to prepare himself for what he's about to see. Ida says he's ready to see, and all he sees is Yui laying on the bed with tubes running into her chest, keeping her alive, but barely. Deku tells him without her heart, it's impossible to save her. It's already incredibly hard to find a heart transplant that'll work. Plus, she's so far down the list, it'll be impossible to get one before she dies. He's sorry, but there's just no way he can save her. He needs to brace himself. At most, all she has is a few hours left. Once you see her die, a part of you dies with her. After all, you'll never be the same when dealing with matters of the heart. Chapter 6. Get the joke? Deku sits with Ida, as requested by his friend. Deku shows support as much as he can, without smiling. Seeing Ida in this state brings joy to Deku, an emotion he rarely lets himself feel in his adult life. The hours pass and the room has been silent. Deku counts down the final seconds. 3, 2, 1. Her life support systems flatline, and Ida has tears falling down his face. Deku gets up. He puts his hand on Ida's shoulder and says that, I'll be heading out. You need some time alone to grieve. So, he leaves Ida in the room in a puddle of his own tears and a broken heart to match it. Deku would leave the hospital and begin his new mission, finding a way into the League of Villains. However, for that, he'd need one man in particular, the hero killer Stain. It's finally time to track him down. His last known location was heading towards Hosu City. Deku would have Lady Nagant doing recon in the city on rooftops, while Toga looks through the alleys, and Deku would look through the city as a normal member of society. Covering all three options would ensure that Stain is found. Sure enough, when the night hours hit, Stain is found. During the internships, Ida would still be in Hosu, as the note Deku gave him said that Yui was killed by the hero killer. So Ida would be out for blood. However, at this time, Deku would be on a roof with Stain after finally tracking him down. That's when Shigaraki and Kurogiri would show up and warp Deku and Stain back to their base. This would be Deku's best possible outcome, since Deku has already talked to Stain for a few hours before this. He'd be ready to help Deku at the drop of a coin. Shigaraki would begin his rambling. However, he'd ask Deku, "Who are you?" Deku would tell him, "Call me Hush. That's all you need to know. But I can tell you that our goals align." Shigaraki would ask him, "Explain yourself." Deku would say that he doesn't talk to dead men, as he'd spin around behind Shigaraki and put a bullet in his brain, killing him. He'd look at Kurogiri and say, "Get the joke?" Just then the monitor would turn on and say, "Well, it seems you've killed my successor, haven't you, Hush?" Deku would smile and say, "The aim of the wise is not to secure pleasure, but avoid pain." All for one would say, "Ah, yes, Aristotle, you are indeed a wise man in your eyes, but before me I only see a fool. A fool you may see, however, a fool is certainly not me. I came prepared for you all for one. You see, I know all about your quirk, and unlike the others, I have no quirk for you to take. Just like I know that Kurogiri is nothing more than a high-end Nomu, he's by far your best work, and at this current point in time, he'll certainly be your last." All for one would have a confused tone as Deku would push a button in his pocket, and then all the hospitals that were connected to All for One blew up, killing hundreds, if not thousands of people instantly. However, it would destroy all the high-end Nomu data as well. Dr. Ujiko would be killed as soon as the explosions hit, being crushed underneath flaming debris. Anybody can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy, Deku said to All for One. Stain would look impressed at Deku. How he could have as much determination, the strength of will needed to commit so many atrocities. Stain couldn't tell if Deku was a madman, a wild beast, or a god. All for One, now having nothing left up his sleeve and being at a huge disadvantage, would choose to strike a deal that would make Deku very happy. And after a bit of negotiating, an agreement would be reached. However, Deku would have to sacrifice one of his people for the deal to be fully sealed. Deku, of course, agreed to that. However, it would be at his own choosing and time. All for One agreed to those terms and recruited several new members, including Dabi, Twice, Spinner, Magna, Muscular, Moonfish, Mustard, and even broke Snipes out of jail and recruited him. Now, how he would get these people is, you see, he's working with Stain. Most of these people would go evil because of Stain's message and agree with his knowledge, his way of doing things, all of that. And with Snipes, they would have left a body double in his place, so no one would have really known that Snipes was gone. Along with Toga, Stain, and Lady Nagant, Deku and All for One would have a very powerful group, and their first order of operations was the murder of Izuku Midoriya. The person who would be carrying out this mission, or should I say people, would be Stain, Dabi, and Hush. From here, Deku would trust Stain to do the deed, but he wouldn't trust Dabi whatsoever. "This is the point of no return, Hush," Stain would say to him. Deku would say, "They've already passed that point long ago." Stain would ask, when was it that he passed that point? All Deku would say is when Hush was born. Stain would understand, after all, he used to be a vigilante before this. And Deku would call up Ida and say that they should go grab a movie with some friends. He would agree and would bring some of his classmates, like Shota, Uraraka. Bakugo would go, as he's dating Uraraka, so it's kind of like a couple thing. You get two for the price of one. And the final one would be Inasa. After all, UA was closed down after having the murder of 3 students in such a short time. So, most of the UA students would have transferred out or just given up the life of a hero. Deku would meet them all, and immediately Bakugo would recognize Deku. And before he could say anything, Deku would tell him to shut up. He's not the same little kid that he used to bully all the time. This came as a shock to Uraraka, and the other people were waiting for Bakugo to defend himself. However, he chose to remain silent. His silence hurt Uraraka the most. Deku would look at Bakugo and would begin to tell everyone there what Bakugo did to him throughout the years, beating him up every day. The time when Bakugo fell and Deku tried to help him up, only to be thrown into the water and beaten, close to being drowned by Bakugo, telling everyone that his mother was a whore, using his quirk and almost giving him scars and burns. Then finally, how Bakugo would beat him so badly that he almost died and was hospitalized for weeks. Uraraka is heartbroken, and Bakugo asks Deku if they can talk to each other by themselves, and Deku agrees. They walk into the alley, and Deku gives the signal to Stain. Dabi would be confused as Stain would run off, leaving him by himself. Stain would grab Hush, and Hush would say, "Finally time, huh?" Hush would grab his binoculars, as he'd take the trigger out of his pocket. However, while this is going on, Deku and Bakugo are having a conversation all of their own. The conversation would go like Bakugo asking Deku if they can get past what happened a long time ago, if they could choose to move forward, get to know each other again as equals this time around. He doesn't want to be known as the kid who was the bully to him. After all, a lot of things have changed. He's not as strong as he thought he was. That's when Dabi would finally catch up, and Hush would say, "It's about time. You're about to witness the fireworks, Dabi." Hush would then push the button, as all three would look on, as Izuku Midoriya is blown up in an explosion. Ito would rush into the alley, seeing a burned and charred corpse in the place of Deku. Tears would run down Ida's face as the memories he'd made with Deku flooded his mind. All the times where they would play together, study together, him, Momo, the date that they all went on with Yui, all those memories. And now he lies there as a corpse with burns, as an explosion, and there's only one person who has the explosion quirk. And Nasa and Shoto would be checking on Uraraka, who was on the ground in tears and close to passing out, Ida used his reciprocal burst to kick Bakugo in the face, flooring him. And once Bakugo was down, Ida would constantly be beating him, and Bakugo would say, "Stop! Stop! I'm innocent!" Ida wasn't listening. He was strangling Bakugo, nearly snapping his neck. Shoto would try to pull him off. However, Ida would kick him. Shoto's knee would go in backwards, breaking, giving him a permanent injury. Inasa would then know he'd have to use his quirk and start taking the air from Ida, asking Ida if this is what his friend wanted. How would he be feeling watching him kill Bakugo? He wasn't gonna let Ida throw his life away over this slow-life piece of trash. Ida would remember Momo, Deku, and Yui. He'd release his grip, saying that he won't become the very thing that killed his friends and beloved. All Bakugo would say is that he's innocent. Hush would look down and say, "He's innocent. Get the joke?" Chapter 7. Nothing's as it seems. A funeral would be held for Izuku Midoriya, the last of the Midoriya family. So young, dead at the tender age of 18. However, at least he's in a better place with his family, his beloved. Ida was with the Arozu family. All three of them were broken inside as the casket was lowered into the ground. As the priest said, "Rest in peace. May you find comfort in the next life, young Midoriya." All the while, Bakugo was now in prison. Uraka was alone in her house, crying, listening to the rain. Ada and the Momo's family would be placing roses on the grave as Deku was buried right beside Momo. As Uraka was just getting done in the restroom, she'd go to wash her hands and look into the mirror, and she saw Hush as he said, "Boo." She tried to fight back, however he'd slam her head so hard on the sink it'd actually break. He'd then tie a rope around her neck and began to hang her from the ceiling after he shot her with a drug that took her quirk away. From there, he'd wrap her face in bandages and leave a note stabbed into her chest. He has a busy day, but it's about time he got rid of both All for One and All Might in one fell swoop. He'd contact his team and say now is the time for them to cut out the League of Villains. Hush would then begin his plans by sending out Muscular as a dummy, in a way with the sole purpose of delivering a blood-soaked message to the heroes, of course. However, before the grand event, there needed to be one person in particular dealt with, as Snipes was shot in the back by Hush, causing him to fall from the roof towards his death. Snipes looked up, and before he could shoot his gun, a knife was thrown, stabbing him into his neck as a note was attached to the knife. Lady Nagant would be terrified and ask if she was next to die. Hush would walk up to her and whisper in her ear, "Were you scared to kill all those criminals and heroes when you worked for the Public Safety Commission?" Hush asked her, Lady Nagant's body was trembling as she whispered, "No." Hush said, "Then no, you won't be the next. After all, you have a very special role to play coming up." The rain was coming down even harder now, as the police geared up for an all-out attack. The pro heroes arrived one after another. Hush looked on and said, "This is the end of an era. All my work is finally paying off. This is the final stretch. Everything ends this month. They'll feel powerless, afraid, angry, and most importantly, he'll have lost everything that has ever meant anything to him. After all, he'll lose his ambition, the people he loves, and many more. I'll have destroyed him, and revenge will finally be mine. The roots of education are bitter, but the fruits are sweet." Hush would walk away. As the fighting begins, All Might breaks through the door, and Hush triggers the device he planted on Kurogiri, which destroyed his base, meaning he's effectively killed. And there's no escape for the League of Villains. The police rush in with the heroes, and the fight begins. Dabi fights Endeavor. This is all over the news, while Bakyo just received the news that Uraka is dead. And he's heartbroken, crying in his prison cell, begging to be let out. Ida's with the Yaoruzu family, watching as Shoto is with his family in Inasa. The fights are vicious. Police officers are being killed left and right as Moonfish kills Naomasa. Gran Torino takes him out immediately. After this, the civilians in the surrounding areas are being caught up in the crossfire. Hundreds of people are being killed. Nomus are rampaging. This is forcing even more heroes to rush over and try to help. Dabi and Endeavor are fighting brutally. Their flames match each other's. Dabi starts to burn down the city as she pushes back against Endeavor. All Might is fighting for his life against All for One. However, when Gran Torino tries to help, all that happens is he gets himself killed. Things would be much more dire, as he'd be hearing the screams of the innocent as he fought. All for One would be taunting All Might, saying that he's a fool. The real mastermind behind all of this is a man called Hush. All Might would call All for One a liar. After all, he has more influence than anyone else in the entire world. And now that I am here, you will be beaten, and this long war of ours will be over. United States of Smash! All Might would yell as he slammed his fist against All for One. He would be barely able to hold on to his muscle form just as his fist was raised and the fighting stopped. The villains were defeated, the civilians cheered, and All Might held his ground. Endeavor, after beating Dabi, talked to him. That's when Dabi asked Endeavor, "How does it feel to defeat your own son?" Endeavor would stop and look at Dabi. With the pouring rain coming down, his dyed hair would return to its natural white color. Dabi would look at Endeavor and say, "I have a really great name. Why don't you use it? My name is Toya Todoroki, the son that you thought was dead." Toya reached into his pocket and pulled out a DNA test. It was a 99% match to Endeavor. However, that was cut short. as civilians screamed at the sight of All Might being shot through the heart from a sniper. Blood went everywhere. That's when a message began to play. It was the message Dobby had pre-recorded. However, halfway through, it cuts towards a man who had his face wrapped in bandages, with a trench coat and body armor, saying that you're the only one being able to see this part of the video. The rest of the world is blissfully unaware of my being. Now I have an opportunity for you to be a real hero, and not this self-indulgent rich boy. Ida would ask, what does he mean? The lights would turn off, and Ida would be looking around, and he'd yell, "Who are you?" A voice would say, "Hush, Ida, hush." Ida would turn around and would be kicked in the side. The fight would be brutal. Ida would be fighting back, and he'd grab the bandages and pull them. The face he saw shook him to his core, and he said, "It's impossible. You died long ago. Big brother, Tensei." Tensei would grab him and kick him. He would be holding a knife to Ida's throat after he picked him up off the ground. Tensei would say, "What's wrong, Ida? Are you upset that your big brother came back from the grave? Or are you wondering how I made this all happen?" Ida would throw Tensei off of him, saying, "You are not my brother." After that, Ida would yell, "Recipro Turbo!" From there, the fight would be on. Tenya and Tensei both using their ultimate attacks. However, Ida would ultimately push past his thoughts and defeat Tensei. Tensei would begin to melt into some strange goo. Ida would know his enemy is Hush, and he won't stop until Hush is dead. Ida would say that nothing's as it seems. Final chapter. Heart of Hush. Hush was in a meeting with a young man in a plague doctor mask. Hush would say, "What are you planning, and why would it concern me? After all, isn't our partnership over?" Overhaul would say, "Well, you did me a favor. After all, going through you for the test granted me valuable data, and no suspicions were made. It's very lucrative to be partnered with you." Hush would look at Twice and Stain and say to Overhaul, "Don't bother with me anymore. I'm cutting all ties effectively immediately. I'm going to do one final act, and this play will be over. I'm in the endgame, and all extras must exit left." Stain would shake Hush's hand and say that it's been a pleasure. Hush would say, "Don't get the wrong idea, Stain." Just then, Lady Nagant shoots Stain in the head. Her bullet changed and started to shoot everyone else in the room, killing them all. Hush said, "Well done," as he pushed a trigger and released a poison into her bloodstream, killing her. From there, he left and went to the address he left for Ida. He managed to get there before Ida and sat behind his desk. He waited for Ida. Thoughts flooded Hush's mind. A time before he became Hush. However, now wasn't the time for such meaningless thoughts. Ida kicked down the door and yelled for Hush to face him. Hush said, "Behind you." Ida turned around and kicked Hush. However, the lights turned on, and an army of hospital staff holding weapons said, "Protect the doctor." Ida was shocked and caught off guard. That led to Hush's favor, as he shot Ida in the leg while he was fighting the hospital staff off. Hush then kneed Ida in the face, going up and then coming down. He elbowed him straight in the face, right after that dropping Ida. The nurses held Ida, who was barely conscious, up as Hush drugged him, knocking him out, and then they carried him to the operation table, where Ida lays awake. After finally coming to after hours, Hush is in front of him. "Who the hell are you?" Ida asked Hush. Hush would say, "Well, I guess I've left you on quite the mystery, haven't I? However, should have been obvious. Tenya, who else knows you this well? Surely you've noticed, right? Think, Ida. Who all died? Not only that, but who knows you so well? Surely you've noticed, right? Think. Out of all the people that died, who was it first? Ah, yes. First, it was that slut you were indulging yourself with, Yui. Secondly, was a friend that you revered as a brother, Izuku Midoriya. Third, a friend of yours, Ochako Uraka. Then you fought a fake of mine that was the spitting image of your deceased brother, Tensei Ida. By then you realized that nothing's as it seems. Isn't that right? So Tenya, who am I?" Ida would say, "You can't be anyone that I know or cared about. They're all dead." That's when Hush started to unwrap his face, saying, "Tenya, oh so ever-trusting Tenya, perhaps this will jog some memories. There is no great genius without some touch of madness." Ida's eyes would tear up, saying, "Izuku, it's actually you." "Yes, it is me, Ida. Who else could have pulled all of these moves and make your life a living hell? After all, nobody knows us better than each other. However, I studied you for far longer than anyone else. I found your weaknesses and exploited every single one. I was striking at a distance. Remember what I told you all those years ago? You need to know your opponent's weakness before you go charging in." After all, it took a great amount of effort, even faking my own death and framing that bastard Bakugo. Although, it's rude to talk ill of the dead, isn't it? Ida would ask, "How did you fake your own death? And what do you mean? Bakugo isn't dead. He's just in prison." Deku would say, "One question at a time, Ida, my friend. First off, I used a woman with a very handy quirk. All I had to do was give her some of my blood, and she turned into a perfect copy of me, able to mimic everything, even down to my voice and DNA. Of course, this all had to be rehearsed ahead of time, so she wouldn't give anything away. I gave her meaning and a new purpose in life, for in serving me, the gutter slut lived up to her full potential. Second question is a very simple one. I had a connection of mine have his inside guys hang Bakugo, and it had such an easy time convincing people it was a suicide in his cell. More importantly, you should be asking, how's Shoto and Inasa, shouldn't you?" Ito would say, "What do you mean?" "Well, that's just it. Shouldn't you just watch the news? It should be on. Here, let me turn the TV on for you." As Deku would turn on the TV, as a news report is going on, reporting on the deaths of the Todoroki family who were brutally killed and disfigured, along with what looks like a family friend. While you were out cold from the drug, I had enough time to make a quick little pit stop and be back before revealing all of this. So, let's get down to it. After all, they were all pretty harmless when you take away their quirks. Deku would show off the quirk-destroying bullets he got from Overhaul, just to let you in on something else. After we're done here, I plan to take up your identity and leave Japan forever, as agreed upon by the Meta Liberation Army. Things are gonna end very poorly for your society, hero. Ada would ask why he's doing all this, and Deku would say he's doing this because his family almost ruined his plans of killing his mother and father. However, that wasn't the main reason. The main reason was that you ran away while she was fighting, and she died without any help or anything else. Where were you, Ada? Going for help? Running to All Might, who just went there, showed up for a big fight with a villain, claimed the glory, and dip, right? No, he died for his sins. The villains are dead as well. All that's left is for you to die, Ada. And then all will be right in this heart of Hush. Deku would then shoot Ida several times, killing him, and immediately begin his surgery. Weeks would pass, and Deku, who had completely made himself look and sound like Ida, left Japan and never looked back. This has been What If Deku Was Hush. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and as always, by Emperor's decree, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.